Hey, I want to say welcome to First Christian. My name is Jimmy. I'm one of the pastors here at FCC, and I'm so glad that you're here today. I want to tell you, if it's your first time here, we're a church that believes Jesus is for you. We say it every single Sunday morning. We're going to say it every single Sunday morning because we just want you to hear it every single weekend. You need to know Jesus is for you. He loves you. He has a plan for your life. There's a reason you're here today. Maybe you're here today because you're trying to, make your wife happy because she said if you go to church, you don't have to go to your mother-in-law's house for lunch or something. I don't know why you're here today. Maybe you're here because you woke up feeling guilty about last night and you thought, I need to go to church today. Maybe you're here for some other reason, but I don't believe it's an accident. I never believe it's a coincidence. I think Jesus wants to say something to you today. And so I just want you to know that I've been praying for you. And as we start a new series today, Brian mentioned a little bit ago, I hope that this series is a chance for you to hear something from God that you need to hear, something He wants to say to you today. If you have a Bible, open up to Matthew chapter 14. If you have the Bible app on your phone, that works. We're going to put some verses on the screen for you too, but I'd love for you to track along with us in whatever you have if you want to do that. Matthew chapter 14. And what we're going to do as we kick off this new series today is take 3 weeks and we're going to talk about what it looks like to follow Jesus into the unknown. Because if you follow Jesus for any amount of time at all, you find out pretty quickly that's what He asks us to do, is to have faith and to step out and to follow Him in new ways or even scary ways or ways that can make us uncomfortable. He's constantly pulling us out of our comfort zones and asking us to take steps with Him into the unknown. And so we're going to talk about that because I'm going to say this up front, okay? Following Jesus is not easy. If you've been following Jesus for a while, you already know that, and you know that's not anything new to you. If you're thinking about following Jesus, but you've just never taken the step, there's a little disclaimer for you. It's never easy. He doesn't call us to do easy things, but He does promise us this, guys. He promises us that if we will follow Him and if we will take steps with Him, that it will be an adventure. It will be fulfilling. It will be rewarding. He will work through us to do things that we can't imagine. And so something that we've said quite a bit here at FCC over the last year is we don't want church to just be a place that you go. It's not a building. It's not an institution. It's not a program. It's not a gathering. Church is a movement of people that we choose to be a part of, and God has put us in the world, or more specifically, He's put us in Canton for a very intentional reason. We're not just here to do this on Sunday morning. He hasn't just put us in Canton. He's put us here for Canton. And our mission as a church, our mission as a movement of God in our community is to make a difference. It's to make our community a better place so that when people start to put that together and they're like, hey, our community is a little bit better because the church is being the church. And those people who say they love Jesus are actually doing what Jesus asked them to do, then that's what's going to make people say, I think I want to be a part of that. Because that looks a little better than what I've experienced so far in my life. Or that looks a little better than what I imagined that it might. And that's the whole idea. And so we're going to talk about that for a few weeks. And specifically, I want to mention a verse as we get going this morning. You don't have to turn here. We'll put it on the screen. But Matthew 4:19 is one of the foundational verses that our mission and our vision are built on. It just simply says this, okay? Jesus, these are His words. He says, come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. Now, here's why this is a big deal, okay? As we have put a new mission and a new vision and a new heartbeat in front of you this past year, it's all built on that verse. And specifically, it looks like this. Our mission as a church, if you've ever wondered, why do we do this? What's our goal? Why are we here? What are we about? Our mission is to reach out with unconditional love to all people and lead them to be all-in disciples of Jesus. Yeah, we're reaching out with unconditional love, but there is an unapologetic agenda. We want people to be all-in disciples of Jesus. So what's that mean? Well, that's where this verse comes into play. Because as we talk about this verse, can we put this back up on the screen, Matthew 4:19? Just leave it there for a couple of minutes. As we talk about this verse and how this shapes our vision, here's what it means, okay? When Jesus said this, He's talking to Peter and some other guys who were fishermen, and He's asking them to leave that life behind and to come and follow Him. He says, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. In other words, you guys are out there on the lake, you're fishing for fish. I have a different job for you. I have a better job for you. I have a more exciting job for you. Or maybe a better way to put it is, I have an adventure for you. I want you to come with me. You're going to see some crazy things. You're going to experience some crazy things. You're going to get to be a part of some crazy things. I want you to come with me and experience this. And so when Jesus says this, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men, here's what we think that means for us as we're trying to be all-in disciples of Jesus. What it means to be all-in breaks down this way. When Jesus said, come follow me, the first thing we take from that is an all-in disciple of Jesus knows and follows him. That was his invitation to Peter and these other guys to come and literally to get to know him and to follow him and to learn from him and to spend time with him and to become more like him. And so an all-in disciple, if we're going to be that, we have to know and follow Jesus. We can't just be casual, distant observers. We have to know and follow him. But then he went on from there because he said, don't just come and follow me. He said, I will make you. In other words, he's alluding to a transformation that happens in our lives as we follow him. And so I would just encourage you that if you've been following Jesus for a while, but nothing in your life has changed, then you haven't gone all in. Because as you follow Jesus and as you go all in, stuff should start to look different in your life. That's what he's telling him. I'm going to make you something that you're not. There's a transformation that's going to take place. And so we've said an all-in disciple knows and follows Jesus, but is also being changed by Jesus. But he doesn't even stop there because he goes on. He says, I'm just not going to make you something. I'm going to make you something very specific. I'm going to teach you how to fish for people, which is a weird thing to say. Maybe you've never heard that before, and you're like, fishing for people, I don't understand. And his disciples, to be honest with you, scratched their heads a little bit too because they didn't understand yet either. But here's what it means. Jesus was saying, I have a mission for you. In other words, I want you to go and I want you to draw as many people to me as you possibly can. That's your job. That's your mission. That's what I have for you to do. And he said, I'm going to give you a new purpose. And so our third piece of this vision is as we're knowing and following Jesus, as we're being changed by Jesus, we want to commit to his mission, not ours. We want to commit to the job that he has for us to do, not the purpose that we've come up for ourselves. It's about his idea of how we should invest our lives, the one and only life that we have. The little bit of time that we get in this world, he has something he wants us to do with that. And so for us to be all in means we know and follow Jesus, and we're being changed by Jesus, and we're committed to his mission. Now, our vision as a church, if you've heard me say this, or you heard Brian or somebody else say this over the past year or so, is pretty simple. We want to help people find hope and experience community and live with purpose. And those three things come from this verse because as people know and follow Jesus, I believe that's where they find hope. And we live in a world of people that are desperately searching for hope. And maybe you're here today because you are desperately searching for hope because there's something in your life that's just not right and it's painful and you're just worn out with it and you just need a little bit of hope. Let me just tell you, you won't find it anywhere else, but as you know and follow Jesus, you will find hope. And we want to help people experience community because we're not built to go through life alone. We need people. We need community. And I believe that as we find community, especially Christ-centered community in the church, that's when Jesus will begin to transform us. It happens in circles, not rows. That's why we want you to be in a life group, and we talk about it all the time. It's why we want you to join Rooted the next time it comes around. Like about 75 or 80 people are going through Rooted right now and learning what life groups are all about. We want you to get into a life group. Because as you have a circle of people in your life and a community, Jesus will work through that to transform you and make you look a little more like him. And we say we want to help people live with purpose. In other words, as you commit to Jesus' mission for your life, you'll discover purpose that you didn't even know was out there for you. And you might think you've got things figured out in your life and it's all good, but man, when you discover Jesus' purpose for your life, it gets so much better than you could have ever imagined before. And we want you to know that purpose. We want you to have that hope. We want you to be in that community because as you do those things, you'll be all in. Before you know it, it just kind of happens. And sooner or later, you're following Jesus and you're learning about this adventure and your life looks like nothing you would have ever dreamt up, but in such an amazing way. And so for the next 3 weeks, we're going to unpack what it looks like to live that out in one very specific way. But today we're going to start at the beginning with this idea. It's a very simple idea, and it's purely this idea that every adventure with Jesus begins with a single step. And today I want you to think about what that step might be. So I'm going to read you a story from Matthew 14. It's one of the most well-known stories in the Bible. People who don't follow Jesus have heard this story. It's one that they teach little kids in church. So if you grew up in church, you probably heard this story as a little kid. But it's an incredible story. Now let me give you a little background. Just before this story that we're going to read in a second takes place, Jesus is teaching, a crowd gathers. There were at least 5,000 people, and typically in that day, they only counted the heads of households, so more likely there were 8 or 10 or 12 or 15,000 people gathered on this massive hillside as Jesus is teaching, and more people just show up, and it goes on all day long. And eventually the people get hungry, and the disciples say, Jesus, we got to feed them before we have a riot. And so Jesus says, go find whatever food you can find. They bring him a few loaves of bread, a couple of fish, and he just miraculously, as only Jesus can, he just keeps reaching in this little lunch pail and pulling more food out and more food out. And before long, this entire crowd of thousands and thousands of people has been fed. And it says there was so much left over at the end that Jesus sent the disciples out to gather up all the leftovers. And there were 12 basketfuls of food left. I mean, it was just this amazing thing for them to get to see and be a part of. What an incredible thing to witness this day on the hillside. So that the day begins to wind down and Jesus is worn out, and the disciples are tired, the crowd's getting restless. And so he says, hey guys, he says to his disciples, you guys go get on the boat. You start sailing to the other side of the lake. He's talking about the Sea of Galilee. It's massive. It's several miles across. He says, you guys start sailing across to the other side. I'll catch up with you later. I'm going to send the crowd home. And so this is what happens in Matthew 14, starting in verse 22. It says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, and so this is sometime between 3 and 6 a.m., later that night, he was alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Let me translate that for you, okay? They're in the middle of this lake, several miles across, and a storm kicks up. And this lake is notorious for storms, and it's notorious for shipwrecks. And so these disciples, even though they're professional fishermen, are freaking out a little bit in the middle of the lake, in the middle of the night. It's pitch black. They can't see anything. All they know is everything around them is chaos. It's crazy, and they're afraid for their lives. Okay, that's what's happening. And Jesus, he's not there. They're just out there on their own. Well, shortly before dawn, again, sometime between 3 and 6 a.m., Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. Don't skip over that detail. He's walking on water. Okay, this is a miracle. This is crazy. It's not something people do. It defies physical laws of nature, right? He's walking on water out toward them. So this makes sense. Verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. This is like a scene from Pirates of the Caribbean, right? They're on the lake, and there's this person walking across the water. If that happened to you, no part of your rational mind would think this is a human being. You'd say the same thing. This is a ghost. I'm seeing something crazy right now. They're already freaking out. They're already scared for their lives. And now here comes this person on the water walking toward them. So they're losing it at this point. They think we've all snapped and gone crazy. Verse 27, but Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. It's me. It is I. Don't be afraid, which is another crazy thing to say, right? Don't be afraid. Verse 28, Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Verse 29, Jesus calls Peter's bluff. Come on, he said, come out of the boat. And so Peter got down out of the boat, and he walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried out, Lord, save me. So Peter, he sees Jesus coming across the water, and even when he recognizes, okay, I think this is Jesus, and he said it's him, but I'm going to test him, right? So Jesus, if it's really you, tell me to get out of the boat and walk on water with you. So Jesus is like, you asked for it. So he said, come on, get out of the boat. And so Peter steps out of the boat. I have to imagine there's a couple of minutes in there where Peter's wrestling with this in his mind, because if he gets out of this boat, he's probably going to die if this is not Jesus. He's going to sink into this stormy seawater, and he's done for. But he gets out of the boat and he begins to walk toward Jesus. But then as he gets a couple of steps into the water, he begins to, maybe the waves are crashing up. I mean, it could be huge waves crashing around him. The wind is blowing and there's thunder and lightning. And this chaos begins to take his focus from Jesus and put it on his circumstances. And as that happens, he immediately just drops into the water. And he cries out for his life. He's terrified. Verse 31 says, immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you are the Son of God. This is an incredible story. It's hard to even visualize this story because it's just so outside of what we as human beings could imagine or what we would ever expect to experience, right? But I want to tell you guys, as we talk about this, as we break this down, this is not a story about Jesus walking on water. And this is not a story about Peter walking on water. This is not a story about a storm. It's simpler than that, okay? If we get right down to it and we get right at the root of this thing, this is a story about faith. And it's a story about trust. Specifically, this is a story about Peter's faith. I mean, he's the guy who had to get out of the boat, right? So we're talking about Peter here. And it's a story about how he responds to the call of Jesus when Jesus said, all right, Peter, come on. You want to get out of the boat? Get out of the boat. Let's do this. It's a story about how Peter answers that call. Now, I got to tell you, this isn't the first time Jesus has asked Peter to get out of a boat. Because that verse we read earlier from Matthew chapter 4, I mean, that was Peter that Jesus was talking to when he's out on the lake, very different circumstance, right? He's just a little ways from shore and he's fishing, and Jesus says, Peter, leave your nets behind and come and follow me. And here's why Peter did that, okay? Here's why he got out of his boat that day. It's because Peter, growing up as a young Jewish boy, every Jewish boy dreamed of being a rabbi, being a teacher, being a religious leader in the Jewish religious system. That's what every single little boy wanted to do. Okay? Maybe to you that sounds boring or like terrible or like the worst dream ever, right? You don't want to be like an astronaut or a baseball player or something. You want to be a rabbi. But that's what every Jewish boy wanted. And so their whole educational system was built on teaching them and training them and preparing them for doing that with their life. And then they get to this point in their life where it's kind of like a tipping point, where they kind of line all these boys up and all the rabbis line up and they're evaluating, okay, which ones do we think have what it takes to do this thing and which ones don't? And so they basically go to the ones who they think have the potential to be future rabbis, future teachers, future leaders, and they say, come and follow me. And they invite those young Jewish boys to come and learn how to do what they do, and they mentor them and they train them to be the next generation, right? But everybody who doesn't have what it takes, they say, go back and learn your family trade. So if your family makes tents, you're going to go learn to do that. If your dad's a doctor, you're going to learn to be a doctor. If your dad's a fisherman, you're going to learn to fish. And so just the fact that Peter's in the boat this particular day tells us that at some point somebody looked at him and said, you don't have what it takes. You're not enough. And he's lived with that his whole adult life. But then along comes Jesus one day, and Jesus says, come and follow me. And Jesus is known as a rabbi. And so for Peter, as he's fishing and he's messing with nets and whatever they do and then, fishing in Jesus' day, he hears this and he looks up and he sees a rabbi, and it's this invitation to follow him. And something inside of him says, this is my shot at my dream. That's why he leaves it all behind and he goes. And so that particular day when Jesus said, Peter, come and follow me, it's a no-brainer. Peter's like, okay, I'm going to go. Obviously, go, right? An easy choice. And so this night on the ocean or on the sea in the storm, like that's not the first time that Jesus called Peter out of a boat. But obviously we're talking about a very different set of circumstances here. Because Peter's been following Jesus for a while and he's seen some crazy things, but this particular night, it's a little scarier. There's some storms around him, and even though he's seen Jesus do some amazing things, his life is on the line. And so this time, Peter's like, this is a no-brainer. No, I'm not doing it. I like it in the boat. It's a little drier in here. Yeah, there's some storms going on, but at least in here, I have some relative sense of safety, right? Let me ask you, have you ever felt like Jesus asked you to do something that felt a little bit crazy? Maybe for you, it was like he asked you to change careers. You can't even explain where the sense came from, but you just felt this, like, it was like this urging that you didn't even know the source, but you couldn't shake it. And eventually you figured out, I think maybe this is Jesus. And I think for whatever reason, he's asking me, like, I'm doing this. I want you to do this. I had a friend years and years ago who was very, very successful in the business world, making well into 7 figures. And for whatever reason, he had this, for him, it was like a day where he just woke up and he felt like Jesus was telling him, I have something else I want you to do. I want you to go and I want you to work in ministry. And so he I'm making a long story short. He left his business career behind, took a much lower paying job in a church as like an administrator, helping the church with all their, finance and payroll and HR and handling all the accounting and everything. And he put all that business experience to work in the church. And people thought he was nuts. You left millions of dollars in a successful career. He's climbing the ladder. He's very, very good at what he did. He left it behind because he felt like Jesus was telling him to go and do this. That seems crazy to me. It might sound crazy to you. It seemed crazy to a lot of people. Has Jesus ever asked you to do anything that just felt crazy? In a relationship, maybe you're in a relationship, but you have this sense that it's not right, it's not healthy, and you sense Jesus saying that relationship, that needs to go, that friendship, that dating thing, whatever, you just need to be done with that person because that is a toxic relationship, it's not good for your soul. And you don't want to leave that relationship behind. You love that person. You've been friends forever. Whatever. You're hoping for a future together, but you just know it's not right, and you sense Jesus telling you this is not good for you, and you're not stupid. You know it's not good for you, but it's like your boat, and you don't want to get out of it, and it just seems crazy, right? Maybe it was like the first time you had this sense that you were supposed to follow Jesus, and you thought, man, if I say yes to Jesus, I'm going to have to leave so much fun behind. Like, do Christians even have fun? I don't know if I want to follow Jesus. I like my life. I like the things I do. I do whatever I want to do. Am I going to have to start going to church every Sunday? Maybe you've asked yourself those questions and you just sensed that Jesus was telling you to follow him, and you just thought, this seems crazy. Why would I leave my life behind and follow Jesus? Does he ever ask you to do anything that seems crazy? Well, that's where Peter is in the story. It's just Jesus is asking him to do something crazy, but remember, here's what it comes down to for Peter. It's like, are you going to take the step out of the boat or not? And for you, it's like, are you going to take the step in whatever direction or not, right? Remember that every adventure with Jesus starts with a single step. And nobody can take that step for you. Nobody could take that step for Peter. He's got this decision point, right? It's this tipping point, and he's got to decide, am I going to get out of the boat or not? So he steps out of the water, and he's fixed on Jesus, but then he gets distracted by the storm, and he begins to sink into the water, and he calls out to Jesus to rescue him. And I think this is a crazy little detail in the story, right? Jesus reaches down into the water, grabs Peter's hand, and he's like holding him, and I picture Peter neck deep in stormy seawater, and he's like, okay, Jesus, are you going to pull me out of here or not? And Jesus looks at him and goes, you have little faith. And Peter's like, are you kidding me? I got out of this boat in the middle of a stormy sea in the pitch black of night, and I walked on water. The other 11 guys, they didn't get out of the boat. How's their faith, Jesus? I have little faith. Jesus like holding him neck deep in the water. He's like, you have little faith. Why would Jesus say that? Here's why I think he said it. Remember what happened the day before? When Peter got to be part of this miracle where Jesus feeds all these people. And Peter got to see it firsthand. And then at the end, you remember that detail about how Jesus sends them out into the crowd to gather up the leftovers. And how many basketfuls were left over? 12, right? And how many disciples of Jesus were in the boat this particular night? 12. There's a basket full of food for every one of them to feed them for this journey across the lake, to give them the energy and the sustenance that they needed to battle this storm, to make it across the lake. Jesus literally fed all these people, still provided enough leftovers to take care of his disciples. And the moral of the story is Jesus is saying, I am not just enough, I am more than enough. And he's not just saying, Peter, I'm enough for you while you're in the boat and you're wrestling with this decision and I'm telling you what you need to do. And maybe you know you need to do it, but now you got to get out of the boat and it's not going to be an easy thing to do. But Peter, I am not just enough for you while you are in the boat. When you step out of that thing into the storm, I will be more than enough for you. And what Jesus would say to you today, if you're wrestling with something that he's calling you to do in your life and you don't want to do it and it seems crazy, and you got to step out of your boat and get out of your comfort zone, and you don't want to. But you know he's calling you to do it. What he would say to you today is, I am not just enough for you, I am more than enough for you. That is what he would say to you today. See, when Jesus shows up and they say, I think it's a ghost, but Jesus calls out, no, it's me. What he's saying there, more accurately translated into English, is I am. When you go back to the Old Testament and you look at places where God says, I am, that is translated from the name Yahweh. We sang it in a song a few minutes ago, and the name Yahweh translates to this. It doesn't just mean I am, but sometimes it's also translated to mean I will be. And so literally when he identifies himself, he is communicating to Peter and everybody else in the boat, I am not just enough for you, I will be. And he would say to you today, I am not just enough for you, I will be. And you can trust me. And you can take steps that feel crazy. Because when he calls you out of a boat, he is inviting you on an adventure that you do not want to miss. I mean, Peter in this moment, he's got a pretty big choice to make. If he says no to this, he's got to live the rest of his life knowing he passed up on this incredible opportunity. But if he says yes, he's putting his life on the line. But imagine the story. I mean, for the rest of his life, every party he goes to, he's like, hey, did you hear when I walked on water with Jesus? It's a pretty good party story, right? I mean, this is what he's considering in this moment as Jesus is inviting Peter to be a water walker. Now, I want you to know that if you follow Jesus for any time at all, he's going to invite you to be a water walker too. And here's some things you need to know about what that looks like in your life as you're considering stepping out of whatever boat you have and walking on water with Jesus in some way in your life. The first thing is this: water walkers recognize God's presence. Remember the disciples, they didn't know if it was Jesus or not. They thought it was a ghost. In Mark's account of this story, by the way, shows up in Matthew, Mark, and John, those 3 books in the New Testament. So in Mark's version of this story, he says Jesus was walking on water and he was about to pass by the disciples. Now, you can picture that at face value, and you picture Jesus like jogging by the boat, waving at them, hey guys, I'll beat you there, right? But that's not what this means when Mark says this. See, if you think back to Elijah's story that we just studied for the last 4 weeks, there's a moment in Elijah's story where he goes to this mountain and he gets in a cave. And then God shows up the next morning and he says, Elijah, hey, come out of the cave and go stand on the mountain because I'm about to pass by. In other words, Elijah, you're going to get to encounter me. So when Mark writes this and he says that Jesus is about to pass by, what he's saying is these disciples are about to have a crazy encounter with God. And as you walk on water, as you step out of your boat, as you step out in faith in whatever direction Jesus is calling you, he will encounter you there. He will meet you there. The first thing that we know about water walkers is they recognize God's presence. Guys, I do not want you to miss it when he shows up in your life because he promises he will be there. In fact, just like his name, I am, translates into these different things, what Jesus would say to you is, not only have I already been there, but I am there and I will be there. Wherever he's calling you to go, however crazy it feels, he's already there. And you can believe he's going to encounter you there, so don't miss it when he shows up. Expect it. Another thing about water walkers is they discern between faith and foolishness. I mean, when Jesus asks you to do something crazy, when you feel that nudge, when you feel that, you get that feeling, the first thing you got to figure out is this really him or did I eat Taco Bell too late last night? You got to figure out, is this a real Jesus thing or is this just my own crazy gut feeling, right? You got to get to the bottom of that. And that's what Peter's trying to work out here. He's got to figure out, is this really God or is this just my own crazy impulse? And so he decides to test Jesus and he says, okay, if it's really you, call me out of the boat. Can I just tell you that when you have moments in your life where you have a little bit of doubt or you question how God is leading you or what Jesus is calling you to, it's okay to tell him. You need to know that God is big enough to handle your doubt. I mean, when Thomas looked Jesus in the face after Jesus was raised from the dead and he didn't believe it was real, what did Jesus say? Get out of here, man. How dare you? He held his hands out and he said, feel them for yourself. He did not send Thomas away, and he won't turn you away. If Jesus is calling you to do something in your life that seems a little bit crazy and you have some doubts, tell him. That's what Peter did in the story, and Jesus said, okay, I'll prove it to you. And that'll be his response to you too. He'll say, if you'll trust me, I'll prove it to you. But you got to discern between faith and foolishness. And as you test the waters, if it really is Jesus calling you to do something crazy, then you've got to face some fear, because getting out of the boat is never easy. There's always a degree of fear, and the fear often will not go away. But water walkers accept fear as the price of growth. You have to face your fear if your faith is going to grow. That's what Peter had to do. You know, a detail in this story I never noticed until this week is it wasn't Jesus' idea for Peter to get out of the boat. It was his own idea. It's like, okay, I'm gonna, I don't think this is Jesus, so I'm gonna call his bluff. And he's like, call me out on the water, and Jesus calls his bluff, right? You ever have a moment in your life where you're like, oh man, what did I get myself into? Because that was Peter right here in this moment when Jesus was like, all right, come on, get out of the boat. And he was like, oh no, I opened my mouth too soon, right? Jesus asks him to get out of the boat, and now he's got to decide, am I going to get out of the boat or not? And here's Jesus saying, don't be afraid. And Peter's like, you're out of your mind, look around. The truth is, the fear for Peter was not going to go away. No matter how long he stayed in that boat and looked at the storm, it wasn't going to get any better. And can I just tell you that in your life, if there's some degree of fear about the step that Jesus is asking you to take, the fear is probably not going to go away. And can I just tell you that if you are waiting in your life for the fear to go away before you take the step, you will probably never move. You will stay in the boat forever, and like Peter would have, you're going to have to live the rest of your life just wrestling and questioning, man, how cool would it have been if I just got out of the boat? And so if you're going to walk on water with Jesus, you have to accept that fear is the price of growth. If your faith is going to grow, there is going to be a degree of facing your fear involved, but if you've recognized the presence of Jesus, then you know that you are not alone in your fear. He is there with you. Another thing about water walkers is they learn to wait on the Lord. I always wondered why Jesus didn't just make the storm calm down and then have Peter step out of the boat. Still would have been crazy, right? Maybe would have made it a little easier for Peter too. But for some reason, Jesus didn't do it that way. He called Peter into the storm. He called him out of the boat into the craziness. And as his disciples are out there, they only wanted one thing. They just wanted the storm to stop. But Jesus, for some reason, allowed it to continue to rage around them until eventually he got in the boat with them and the storm died down. But first he needed them to learn something. And maybe it was, hey, trust my timing. There's a reason I'm letting this storm continue. It's because he needed that moment with Peter in the water to rescue him, to prove to Peter, I've got you. And I am enough for you, and I will be enough for you. And I just want to tell you in your life, whatever storm you find yourself in today, whatever's happening in your life that just has everything just thrown up and it's just like chaos around you, whatever painful thing or whatever broken thing or whatever hurting thing is in your life, and you're frustrated with it, you're angry about it because Jesus, you're praying for him to make it calm down and he's not letting it happen, and now he's asking you to trust him and to follow him, and you're like, that'd be easier to do if you would just fix my marriage, or if you would just fix what's wrong at work, or if you would just fix my friends and the tension in my friendships. Jesus, it'd be easier to do if you just make the cancer go away first. Jesus, it'd be easier to do if you would just break this addiction first. Jesus, it'd be easier to do if I just didn't have this thing tying me down. If you just deal with that first, if you would just make the storm calm down, then I think I'd have what it takes to step out of the boat and follow you. And for whatever reason, he hasn't done that yet, but he's calling you to take that step, and you're frustrated by that. Water walkers learn to wait on the Lord, and what that means is you're just trusting him to say, Jesus, if this storm is continuing in my life, then if nothing else, just teach me to trust you in this. Or teach me to trust you in spite of this. Because if you can learn to step out in faith and trust Jesus in the middle of the storm, then when water's calm, it's going to be easy. And he may want you to step out into a storm just so you learn to trust him. He may want you to step out into the chaos. I mean, we sang about reckless love of God a few minutes ago, right? Some people have a problem with that idea of calling God's love reckless, but he called Peter out of a boat into a storm. That sounds a little reckless to me, don't you think? Wouldn't you agree? And why would he do that? It's because he loved Peter so much. He wanted to teach him something that would change his entire life. Do you think Peter was ever the same after that? Do you think Peter ever forgot that experience? I mean, it changed everything. And maybe Jesus is calling you to trust him and to step out of your comfort zone in the middle of a storm so that he can change your life in a way you will never forget. And as you do, you will learn to trust him. And he'll strengthen your faith. And that's what's going to sustain you when things get really, really hard. That's where hope comes from. So you learn to wait on the Lord. And then the last thing is this. Water walkers, man, they get out of the boat. They get out of the boat. We all have boats. You have one. It could be your job, or it could be your family, or a relationship, or, it could be anything else. It could just be your life as it is. You're comfortable. And so when Jesus starts talking to you and telling you and prompting you and giving you these feelings, taking steps and trusting him, you fight against that because you're comfortable. You're in your boat. It's good. Even if there's a storm going on, there's some relative sense of safety just because you're in the boat and you don't want to get out. Remember, Peter, he had to make this decision. And here's the thing. Jesus did not ask Peter to test the water. I know what I'm about to say is going to sound easier said than done. So don't think I'm trying to stand up here and make this sound easy, okay? It's never been easy for me. And if I'm being honest with you, I would tell you I've probably said no to Jesus more in my life than I've said yes. Sometimes it makes me sad to think of the things that I might have missed out on because I didn't have the faith to take the step he asked me to take. When he asked Peter to get out of the boat, he didn't say, hey, Peter, dip your toes in the water. See, it's not that bad. He said, get out of the boat, man. Go all in. Take the step. Trust me. Walk toward me. And see that I've got you. That's what water walkers do. They get out of the boat. They take that step. Every adventure with Jesus begins with that step. So let me ask you this morning, what step is Jesus asking you to take? What's that look like? I want to give you 2 specific challenges today, okay? Here's the first one. We're 3 weeks away from Easter. Who is the person that is in your life that you have just had this feeling like I should invite them to come try church with me, or I should invite them to hang out with my life group, or I should just invite them to coffee so I can just, hear how they're doing or share my story with them or whatever. There's somebody, a family member, a neighbor, a coworker, somebody from your gym, your kids' soccer league. There's somebody in your life that God has put there for you to specifically invest in so that you can point them to Jesus. Who is it? I want you to think about it right now because, guys, we are 3 weeks from Easter. You get one shot a year to make the easiest invite you ever make, and that is, hey, you want to come to church on Easter? It's going to be a great day. You can sit next to me. If there is a Sunday all year long that most people won't say no, it's that one. Can I also just encourage you with this? Even if they say no, you're not responsible for their answer. You're just responsible to ask the question. So let me challenge you to think about who your one is. And then take the step. Just ask them to come with you or ask them to go to coffee or whatever it is. But don't let those opportunities pass you by. Take a step, okay? Here's the other thing. Maybe you're here today and you've just never trusted Jesus with your life before. Maybe you've been coming to church for a while and you've been testing the water. And even though you feel that Jesus is calling you to get out of the boat and trust him, it's just a step that seems too big to take. And so you've never taken the step. And week after week after week, you show up here and you see people get in that water. You hear people confess that Jesus is Lord. You hear people accept his grace and his mercy and his hope. And something inside of you says, I should do that. But you just don't. Maybe it's been months. Maybe it's been years. And you hear us talk about it, but you've never gotten yourself there, and you've said, I got to learn a little more. I got to figure a few things out, or I got to deal with that addiction, or I got to deal with that relationship, or I got to deal with this, or I got to deal with that. And you have all these excuses for why you've never followed Jesus. And can I just tell you, no excuse is good enough. Here's what happens in the Bible. When somebody follows Jesus, it's like the minute that they realize who he is and they believe he's the Son of God. That's it. They don't know it all. They don't have it all figured out. He does the work to change stuff. If you're waiting for you to figure it out on your own, it's never going to happen. But the minute they figure out who Jesus is, they just have to decide what to do with that. And so I'll just ask you today, if you've figured out who Jesus is, what's kept you from making that choice? If you figured out who Jesus is, what's kept you from taking that step? Because he wants you to get out of the boat. He wants to take you on an adventure where he will teach you to trust him and have faith in him, and he'll change everything in your life. But it starts with a single step. So for you today, maybe it looks like this. If that's you that I'm talking to, and you've realized who Jesus is, but you've never said, okay, I'm in. Here's what you're going to do, okay? Here's what it looks like. We're going to sing a song. I'm going to stand right over there. You come and talk to me and say, okay, that's a step I need to take. I've been making excuses. I've been fighting it. I just realized, whatever, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to judge you. People will be pumped for you. And you just say, okay, I don't have it all figured out, but I'm ready. I'm going to let Jesus do that part. I'm just going to trust him and follow him. Come and talk to me. Today's probably your day. That's probably the reason you're here today. That's probably why you got out of bed this morning, so that you can make that decision to follow him out into the waves and learn to walk with him and learn to trust him and see what he has in store for you. As we sing this song, that's what I want you to do. And what you'll find is that Jesus is not just enough. He's more than enough for the good seasons and the hard seasons in your life. He proved it to us on the cross. He proved it to us when he died in your place and my place to give us hope. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take communion together in a second. If you have the communion elements, grab them right now. And I'm just going to pray. We're going to give you a second to take communion before we sing this song and wrap up. And this is a moment every Sunday where we remember that grace and that hope. And we just say, thank you, Jesus, that when you call me to step out into the waves, I know I won't sink because you've got me. And I can trust you. He's proven it over and over and over, and he won't fail now. Jesus, thank you so much that you have us and that you're more than enough, and we can trust you and we can rely on you. God, I pray that you'd help us to be aware of the people around us that you're leading us to reach out to. God, to give us the courage to do that, to get out of the boat, to take a step. God, I pray for anybody who's here right now who's never trusted you and followed you with their life, and so they've never experienced your hope. They haven't found that community. They haven't discovered that purpose. God, I pray that today is their day. We're seeing people every single weekend trusting you and following you. I believe there's so much more to come as you just continue to change lives and show us what you want to do and how you want to use us in our city and beyond this to build your kingdom. And God, I just pray for anybody who's been on the fringes watching that today would be the day they would say, okay, I'm done observing, I'm all in. God, give them the courage to take that step today. And thank you for the promise that when we trust you, when we step out of the boat into the waves, you're already there and you will hold us and we can't fail, because you're more than enough. Jesus, we love you and we pray this in your name. Amen.